The year is AD 64. Rome is burning. For 6 days and 7 nights, a great fire sweeps through the heart of the empire. It consumes the wooden tenements, the grand markets, the very soul of the city. When the smoke finally clears, vast swathes of Rome are nothing but ash and rubble. The people are homeless, desperate and angry. They need someone to blame. Emperor Nero, a man known for his extravagance and volatile temper, feels the heat of their suspicion. Rumours swirl that he started the fire himself, perhaps to clear land for a new, opulent palace. He needs a scapegoat, and he finds one in a small, misunderstood community known as the Christians. Nero's response is swift and brutal. He rounds up the Christians, a group still on the fringes of Roman society. He accuses them of hatred against mankind. The historian Tacitus tells us what happened next. It was a spectacle of cruelty designed to entertain and distract the Roman mob. Some Christians were dressed in animal skins and torn apart by dogs in the arena. Others were crucified, a slow and agonizing death reserved for the worst criminals. The persecution was not just about punishment. It was about public theatre, a dark and twisted performance to quench the public's thirst for vengeance and shift blame away from the emperor. The most horrific display came at night. Nero offered up his own gardens for the show. Christians were tied to posts, covered in pitch and tar, and set alight. They became human torches, their burning bodies illuminating the emperor's chariot races. This was not a legal proceeding. It was a pogrom. It was raw, unadulterated terror unleashed upon a people whose only crime was their faith. The scale of the violence was meant to extinguish this new religion before it could take root. Nero sought to make an example of them, to show the world the price of defying the Roman way. This first great persecution set a dark precedent. It established Christians as a convenient target for imperial wrath and public frustration. While it was localized to Rome and driven by Nero's personal agenda, it planted a seed of suspicion that would fester for centuries. The stories of those who died, of their courage in the face of unimaginable horror, began to circulate among the faithful. Nero thought he could burn away this new faith with fire and terror. He was wrong. He had, in fact, just lit a fire of a different kind, one of martyrdom and resilience that would ultimately outlast his empire. Why did the mighty Roman Empire, a civilization that absorbed countless gods and cults, despise the Christians so much? The reasons were complex, woven from threads of politics, religion, and social misunderstanding. At the heart of the conflict was the Roman demand for loyalty, symbolized by the imperial cult. Every citizen was expected to offer a pinch of incense to the emperor's statue, acknowledging his divine status. It was a gesture of political allegiance, not necessarily deep religious belief. To the Romans, it was like a pledge of allegiance, but for Christians, it was idolatry. They believed in one God, and they could not worship a man as a god. This refusal was seen as stubbornness, as treason. The secrecy of Christian gatherings also bred deep suspicion. They met in private homes, in catacombs, in hidden places away from public view. This was born of necessity to avoid persecution. But to the Roman mind, secrecy equaled conspiracy. What were they doing in these clandestine meetings? Rumours, dark and wild, began to spread like wildfire. The Romans, hearing whispers of Christians consuming the body and blood of their saviour, twisted this into accusations of cannibalism. They heard Christians call each other brother and sister and share a kiss of peace, leading to lurid tales of incest and orgies. These were baseless slanders, but they painted a picture of a depraved and dangerous cult. Furthermore, Christianity seemed fundamentally antisocial to the Roman way of life. Christians rejected the pantheon of Roman gods who were believed to protect the state. They didn't participate in the public festivals and games which were often tied to pagan rituals. This withdrawal from public life made them seem like outsiders, a state within a state. They were accused of being atheists because they denied the existence of the Roman gods. In a world where religion and civic duty were intertwined, this was a serious charge. Their refusal to conform was seen as a threat to the peace of the gods, which was believed to guarantee the empire's stability and prosperity. This potent cocktail of political defiance, social exclusivity, and horrifying rumors created an environment of deep-seated distrust. Christians were seen not just as followers of a strange religion, but as a threat to the very fabric of Roman society. They were scapegoats waiting to happen. Whenever there was a disaster, a plague, a famine, a military defeat, it was easy to blame the Christians for angering the gods. This popular hostility gave emperors the social license they needed to launch persecutions. It wasn't just the emperors who feared the cross, it was the Roman people themselves who saw in it a shadow threatening to upend their world. The persecution of Christians was not a constant, relentless campaign for 3 centuries. Instead, it came in waves. There were long periods of relative peace, where the faith was largely ignored and allowed to grow. Then, suddenly, the imperial hammer would fall, bringing terror and bloodshed. These waves were often driven by specific emperors who saw Christianity as a direct threat to the unity and stability of the Roman Empire. They were not random acts of violence, but calculated policies designed to enforce conformity and restore traditional Roman values. Each wave was more systematic and widespread than the last, reflecting the growing presence of the Church. The first empire-wide systematic persecution began under Emperor Decius in AD 250. The empire was facing immense pressure from barbarian invasions and internal instability. Decius believed the solution was to restore the favor of the old gods. He issued an edict requiring every single citizen of the empire to perform a public sacrifice to the Roman gods in the presence of a magistrate. Those who complied received a certificate, AN, as proof of their loyalty. Those who refused faced arrest, torture, and execution. This was a direct and brutal test of faith. It was no longer enough to be a quiet Christian. Now everyone had to publicly prove their pagan piety. Just a few years later, Emperor Valerian launched another fierce persecution in AD 257. His approach was more targeted. He aimed to dismantle the Church's leadership and seize its assets. His first edict ordered bishops, priests, and deacons to be arrested and forced to sacrifice. Christian senators and nobles were stripped of their rank and property. A second edict, even more severe, decreed death for any clergy who refused to comply. Valerian sought to decapitate the Church, believing that if he could remove its leaders and its wealth, the movement would collapse. He understood that Christianity was becoming an organized institution, and he tried to break it. The final and most terrible wave of persecution was unleashed by Emperor Diocletian, beginning in AD 303. Known as the Great Persecution, it was the most determined effort to eradicate Christianity completely. Diocletian was a reformer who had stabilized a crumbling empire, and he saw the Church's exclusive loyalty to Christ as the last major obstacle to his vision of a united state. Edicts were issued ordering the destruction of churches, the burning of scriptures, and the arrest of all clergy. Later edicts demanded that all Christians, not just the clergy, sacrifice to the gods or face death. For nearly a decade, the full might of the Roman state was brought to bear against the Church in a final, desperate attempt to wipe it from existence. In the story of the early Church, no two figures stand taller than the apostles Peter and Paul. Their final days, spent in Rome during the Neronian persecution, became a cornerstone of Christian tradition. Peter, the fisherman from Galilee, the rock upon whom Jesus said he would build his church, faced his end with a humility that defined his life. According to tradition, when he was sentenced to be crucified, he made a final, poignant request. He declared himself unworthy to die in the exact same manner as his Lord, Jesus Christ. He asked to be crucified upside down. His executioners granted this strange wish, and so Peter met his end. His world literally turned on its head, a powerful symbol of his faith. Paul's story is one of dramatic transformation. He was once Saul of Tarsus, a zealous persecutor of Christians himself. But a blinding vision on the road to Damascus changed everything. He became the faith's most tireless missionary, a Roman citizen who used his status to travel the empire and spread the message of Christ. As a citizen, he was spared the humiliation of crucifixion. Instead, he was granted the swifter death of beheading. Tradition holds that he was executed outside the walls of Rome. His final letters, written from a Roman prison, are filled not with fear, but with a sense of peace and completion. He wrote, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith." The deaths of Peter and Paul had a profound and lasting impact on the Christian community in Rome and beyond. These were not just anonymous victims, they were the giants of the faith, the direct links to Jesus himself. Their willingness to die for their beliefs sent a powerful message. It demonstrated that their faith was not a fleeting opinion, but a conviction worth the ultimate price. Their martyrdom transformed Rome, the seat of their persecutors, into a sacred city for Christians. The sites of their executions and burials became holy ground, places of pilgrimage where the faithful would gather in secret to honor their memory and draw strength from their example. These stories, passed down from one generation to the next, became a source of immense courage for Christians facing their own trials. If Peter and Paul, the leaders of the church, could face death with such unwavering conviction, then so could they. The martyrs did not die in vain. Their blood, as the early church father Tertullian would later write, became the seed of the church. Their sacrifice was not an end, but a beginning. It was a testament to a faith so powerful that it could stare into the face of the Roman Empire's worst cruelty and not flinch, inspiring countless others to join a movement sanctified by the courage of its heroes. The story of martyrdom is not just one of apostles and bishops. It is also the story of ordinary people filled with extraordinary courage. Few accounts are as moving or as personal as that of Vibia Perpetua and her servant Felicity. In AD 203, in the city of Carthage, a new persecution flared up. Perpetua was a young noblewoman, well-educated, and a new mother with a nursing infant. Felicity was a slave, heavily pregnant, and her fellow prisoner. Their story survives because Perpetua kept a diary in prison, a raw, first-hand account of her final days. It is a window into the heart of a martyr. Perpetua's diary details the immense pressure she faced. Her elderly pagan father visited her repeatedly, begging her to renounce her faith for the sake of her family and her baby son. He kissed her hands, threw himself at her feet, and wept, pleading with her not to bring shame upon his name. "I was grieved for my father's sake," Perpetua wrote, "but I could not be moved. When the Roman governor asked her, 'Have pity on your father's grey head. Have pity on your infant son. Offer the sacrifice for the welfare of the emperor,' she gave a simple, unshakable reply: 'I will not. I am a Christian.'" This quiet defiance, this choice of faith over family and life itself, was a testament to her profound conviction. Felicity's trial was of a different kind. Roman law forbade the execution of pregnant women. She was due to give birth soon, and she feared she would be left behind while her friends went to their martyrdom. She prayed with her fellow prisoners, and just 2 days before the games, she went into a painful labour and gave birth to a baby girl, who was then adopted by a Christian woman. When a guard mocked her, saying, "You who are in such suffering now, what will you do when you are thrown to the beasts?" Felicity's reply was full of faith. "What I am suffering now," she said, "I suffer by myself. But then another will be inside me who will suffer for me, just as I shall be suffering for him." On the day of the games, Perpetua and Felicity walked into the amphitheatre together, joyful as though they were on their way to heaven. They faced down a wild heifer, a particularly cruel choice of beast meant to mock their gender. Wounded and bleeding, they stood together one last time. In a final act of solidarity, Perpetua helped a young, nervous gladiator to deliver the killing blow, guiding his sword to her own throat. Their deaths were not a defeat, but a triumph of the human spirit. Their story, preserved in Perpetua's own words, became one of the most beloved texts in the early church, inspiring generations of Christians with its powerful portrait of female courage, friendship, and unwavering faith. For nearly 300 years, Christian architecture was an architecture of hiding. There were no grand cathedrals with soaring steeples or stained glass windows. The church was a community, not a building. Believers gathered where they could, in secret and out of sight. They met in the private homes of wealthier members, in rooms set aside for worship. These were the ma or house churches. They would gather in a courtyard or a dining room, sharing a communal meal, praying and listening to readings from the scriptures. The space was simple, functional and intimate. It had to be. At any moment, the authorities could burst in, and the congregation would have to scatter. Another key location for early Christians, especially in Rome, were the catacombs. These were not, as is often believed, regular places of worship. They were vast underground cemeteries, networks of tunnels dug out of the soft volcanic rock. Christians buried their dead here because they believed in the resurrection of the body and rejected the Roman practice of cremation. Among the tombs of their fellow believers, they would sometimes gather to commemorate the anniversaries of the martyrs' deaths. These dark, cramped passageways, decorated with simple symbols like the fish, the anchor, and the shepherd, became sacred spaces, reminders of the communion of saints and the promise of life after death. Then, with the rise of Constantine, everything changed. The architecture of hiding gave way to an architecture of triumph. Christianity stepped out of the shadows and into the sunlight. The emperor himself sponsored the construction of magnificent new buildings for worship, the basilicas. The basilica was a Roman architectural form, a large rectangular public hall often used for law courts and administrative functions. Constantine adapted this design for Christian use. It was perfect. A long central nave could hold a large congregation, and the apse at one end, where the magistrate once sat, was the ideal place for the altar and the bishop's chair. Suddenly, Christianity had a public face, and it was grand and imposing. Great basilicas rose over the traditional sites of the martyrs' graves, like St. Peter's Basilica over the tomb of Peter and St. Paul's outside the walls over the tomb of Paul. These were no longer simple rooms, but vast, awe-inspiring spaces, funded by the imperial treasury and decorated with glittering mosaics. The contrast could not be more stark. The journey from the quiet hidden house church to the monumental public basilica is the story of Christianity's own journey. From a persecuted sect, whispering its prayers in secret, to the favoured faith of the Roman Empire, proclaiming its message to the world. The turning point for Christianity came with a man and a battle. The man was Constantine, one of several ambitious generals fighting for control of the Roman Empire in the early 4th century. The empire was in turmoil, locked in a series of brutal civil wars. In the year AD 312, Constantine marched his army towards Rome to confront his rival, Maxentius. The fate of the empire hung in the balance. Constantine knew his forces were outnumbered. He needed more than just military strategy. He needed divine help. What happened next would change the course of Western history forever. According to the historian Eusebius, on the eve of the battle, Constantine looked up at the sun and saw a cross of light above it. With the cross were the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "In this sign you will conquer." That night he had a dream in which Christ appeared to him and commanded him to make a new military standard, a banner bearing the Christian symbol. This was the labarum, a standard decorated with the Chi-Rho, the first 2 letters of Christ's name in Greek. Constantine, who had previously been a worshipper of the sun god Sol Invictus, put his faith in this vision. He ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol on their shields. The next day, the 2 armies met at the Milvian Bridge, just outside Rome. The battle was fierce, but Constantine's troops, fighting under the new sign, were victorious. They pushed Maxentius's army back towards the Tiber River. In the chaos of the retreat, the bridge of boats they had built collapsed, and Maxentius, weighed down by his own armour, drowned in the river. Constantine entered Rome as the undisputed ruler of the Western Roman Empire. He attributed his stunning victory not to his own military genius, but to the power of the Christian God. This was a revolution. For centuries, the Roman state had persecuted Christians. Now, the emperor himself was a convert, or at the very least, a patron of the faith. He had won the ultimate prize, control of Rome, under the banner of the cross. This event marked the beginning of a profound shift in the relationship between the Church and the state. The emperor, once the Church's greatest persecutor, was now its greatest protector. The sign that had once been a symbol of shame and execution, seen on the backs of criminals, was now a symbol of imperial victory and divine favour, carried at the head of the Roman legions. Following his victory at the Milvian Bridge, Constantine met with Licinius, the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, in the city of Milan in AD 313. Together they issued a proclamation that would formally end the long night of persecution. This was the Edict of Milan. It was not a decree that made Christianity the official state religion, as is sometimes thought. Rather, it was a landmark declaration of religious freedom. The edict granted full legal toleration to Christians and indeed to followers of all religions. It was a radical departure from the past, a moment when the Roman state officially stepped back from compelling religious belief. The text of the edict is remarkable for its clear and pragmatic language. It states that Christians and all others should have liberty to follow that mode of religion which to each of them appeared best. The goal, the emperors declared, was to ensure that whatsoever divinity dwells in heaven may be benevolent and propitious to us. It was a policy designed to bring peace and stability to a fractured empire. The edict went further than just tolerance. It ordered that all confiscated church property, lands, buildings, and cemeteries seized during the Great Persecution under Diocletian was to be returned to the Christian communities immediately and without charge. The impact of the Edict of Milan was immediate and profound. The threat of arrest, torture, and execution was lifted overnight. Christians could now worship openly and without fear. Priests and bishops could organize their communities, build churches, and spread their faith in public. The edict effectively dismantled the legal framework of persecution that had been in place for generations. It was a complete reversal of imperial policy. The state was no longer the enemy of the church. It was now its legal protector and benefactor. The emperor, who had once demanded sacrifice to pagan gods, was now ensuring the Christians got their property back. This act of imperial clemency set in motion a chain of events that would elevate Christianity to the heart of Roman life. Constantine did not stop at mere toleration. He began to actively favor the church. He granted tax exemptions to the clergy, appointed Christians to high government posts, and poured imperial funds into the construction of grand basilicas. While paganism was not yet outlawed, the tide had irrevocably turned. The Edict of Milan was the legal foundation upon which a new Christian empire would be built. It was the moment the cross, once a symbol of state-sponsored terror, became a symbol protected by the state itself. Looking back across the centuries, a strange and powerful paradox emerges. The very force that was meant to destroy Christianity, the brutal and systematic persecution by the Roman Empire, was one of the key ingredients in its eventual triumph. The Roman emperors believed that by making examples of Christians, by subjecting them to the most public and terrifying deaths, they could stamp out the faith. They were mistaken. Instead of extinguishing the flame, they fanned it into a roaring fire that would eventually consume the old pagan world and forge a new one. The courage of the martyrs was the Church's most effective form of evangelism. When ordinary Romans in the crowd saw men, women, and even children face down lions, fire, and the gladiators' sword without renouncing their faith, it had a profound effect. They saw a conviction that was stronger than the fear of death. The early church father Tertullian famously wrote, "Plures efficimur, quotient metimur a vobis, semen est sanguis Christianorum." We multiply every time we are mown down by you. The blood of Christians is seed. The spectacle of martyrdom intended to terrorize often inspired awe and curiosity. People began to ask, what is this faith that can inspire such devotion? Furthermore, persecution purified and strengthened the church from within. In times of peace, it was easy to be a Christian. But when an edict was issued demanding sacrifice, it forced a choice. It weeded out the lukewarm and the half-hearted. Those who remained were those with a deep, tested, and resilient faith. The shared experience of suffering and survival forged an incredibly strong bond of community among believers. They relied on each other, supported the families of the imprisoned, and celebrated the memory of their fallen heroes. This created a tight-knit, disciplined, and highly motivated organization that was difficult to break. Ultimately, the long struggle with Rome transformed Christianity from a small, scattered sect into a powerful institution capable of stepping into the vacuum left by the declining pagan cults. When Constantine looked for a force to help him unify the empire, he saw in the church an organization with a clear structure, a powerful message of hope, and a proven resilience that the old religions lacked. The dramatic shift from a persecuted minority to the favored faith of the empire was not a simple accident of history. It was the culmination of 3 centuries of endurance. The church had been tested in the fires of the Colosseum and had emerged stronger, ready to shape the future of the very empire that had tried to destroy it.